The US government owes more than $36 trillion. It pays over $1 trillion a year just in interest. Not paying the debt down, just keeping it alive. There are only 4 ways out of a debt problem this large. 3 of them are either impossible or catastrophic. The 4th one is already in motion. And if you have savings, a paycheck, or any fixed income, you're the one covering the bill. Here's exactly how it works and what to do about it. To understand what's happening right now, you need one number: the debt-to-GDP ratio. It measures how much the government owes compared to the total size of the economy. When it's low, the debt is manageable. When it climbs above 100%, the government owes more than the entire country produces in a year. Right now, the US debt-to-GDP ratio sits at roughly 120%. The last time it was this high was immediately after World War II, when the government had borrowed massively to finance the war effort. Back then, they had the same problem facing policymakers today: too much debt, not enough tax revenue to cover it, and interest rates they desperately needed to keep low. Because higher rates meant crushing interest payments that would make everything worse, so they came up with a plan. It worked. The debt burden shrank dramatically over the following 3 decades. But it came at a cost that most people never saw coming, because it was never voted on, never announced, and never showed up as a line item on anyone's tax return. That same plan is being quietly reassembled today, and it has a name most people have never heard: the Fed-Treasury Accord. When a government's debt becomes unsustainable, there are only 4 ways out. Option 1 is running a surplus. Cut spending. Stop borrowing. Pay the debt down over time. Given that government spending has continued to increase regardless of which party holds power, this option isn't realistic in the current environment. Option 2 is default. Simply refuse to pay. The debt disappears overnight, and so does the global financial system. Every bank, pension fund, and government on Earth holds US Treasuries as the foundation of their reserves. A US default would be catastrophic in a way that makes the 2008 financial crisis look minor. Not a serious option. Option 3 is growing out of it. If the economy grows faster than the debt grows, the ratio shrinks on its own. This is what happened in the post-war boom years. Millions of workers returning home, productivity surging, technological advances driving expansion. Today, AI and automation represent the best hope for this kind of growth. Possible, but not guaranteed, and not fast enough on its own. That leaves option 4, inflate the debt away. This is the one that's actually happening, and it's important to understand exactly how it works, because it's far more subtle than it sounds. Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine you took out a $500,000 mortgage. On the day you borrowed it, that debt represents 100% of your home's value. Now suppose inflation runs at 4% per year. Your home rises in value to $520,000. You still owe $500,000, but that debt is now a slightly smaller percentage of what you own. The burden feels lighter. Not because you paid it off, but because the measuring stick changed. The government does the same thing with the entire economy. The national debt is measured in dollars, but inflation makes those dollars worth less, while simultaneously pushing GDP higher in dollar terms. The debt-to-GDP ratio shrinks, not because the debt disappeared, but because every dollar is worth a little less. There's no free lunch here. Someone pays the difference. That someone is everyone who holds dollars. Do higher prices at the grocery store, higher rent, higher costs for everything. It's a quiet tax. One that requires no vote, no legislation, and no announcement. It simply shows up as prices rising slightly faster than your wages. This mechanism has a formal name in economics: Financial Repression. It describes a situation where the government deliberately keeps borrowing rates below the rate of inflation, meaning it gets to pay back its debt with dollars that are worth less than the ones it borrowed. It sounds abstract, but it worked before, and the historical playbook for doing it is being dusted off right now. From 1942 through 1951, the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury operated in close coordination. The Fed pegged short-term rates near zero and capped long-term bond yields at 2.5%. Whenever inflation threatened to push market rates higher, the Fed stepped in and bought bonds, as many as needed, to keep rates at the target. This is called yield curve control. The government could borrow cheaply. The war debt was gradually inflated away. And it worked. The debt-to-GDP ratio fell from around 120% to roughly 30% over the following 3 decades. But inflation also hit 17% in 1946. By 1951, it had reached 21%. At that point, the Federal Reserve had had enough. They ended the arrangement and reasserted their independence through what became known as the Treasury-Fed Accord of 1951, an agreement that the Fed would no longer take direction from the Treasury on which bonds to buy and at what price. For 70 years, that accord defined the separation between monetary policy and government financing. Now, with the debt-to-GDP ratio back at 120%, the incoming Fed Chair Kevin Warsh has called for a new accord between the Fed and the Treasury. Most people heard that and moved on. They shouldn't have. Here's where it gets important. Because the new plan has a twist that makes it harder to see and harder to criticize than anything the Fed did in the 1940s. The problem the new Fed chair faces is this. The White House wants short-term interest rates cut. Cutting rates can reignite inflation. When inflation rises, long-term bond investors demand higher yields to compensate, which pushes up the government's borrowing costs and makes the debt problem worse. The old solution was for the Fed to print money and buy long-term bonds directly, absorbing supply and keeping yields capped. But Warsh spent years publicly criticizing exactly that approach. He can't walk in and immediately do what he said was a disaster. So the plan works through two different mechanisms. The first is restructuring the Fed's own portfolio. The Fed currently holds large amounts of mortgage-backed securities and long-term bonds. It could sell those and replace them with short-term Treasury bills. That reshuffles existing holdings without expanding the balance sheet, giving the government a fresh source of demand for its short-term borrowing. It doesn't look like money printing, but the effect on government borrowing costs is similar. The second mechanism is bank deregulation, and this is the one to watch closely. There's a rule called the Supplementary Leverage Ratio, or SLR. It limits how many U.S. Treasury bonds a bank can hold relative to its capital. The rule exists to prevent banks from concentrating too heavily in government debt. In 2020, that rule was temporarily suspended. Banks immediately went on a Treasury buying spree. Demand for government bonds surged. Long-term yields fell. The government borrowed cheaply. The suspension ended in 2021. Banks had to pull back. Now consider what happens if the SLR is lifted permanently. Banks can buy unlimited government bonds. The Fed doesn't need to print money and buy them directly. Long-term yields stay capped because the banking system, funded by your deposits, absorbs the supply. The Fed chair gets to say he never engaged in the quantitative easing he criticized. But the effect on government borrowing cost is nearly identical. The difference is who's doing the buying, and that the buyer is now sitting on your savings account. This kind of coordination between the Fed and the Treasury, aligning the balance sheet strategy of the central bank with the financing needs of the government, is exactly what the new accord framework provides. Let's bring this together practically. The government reduces its debt burden by making your dollars less valuable, not through a tax. Through prices. The mechanism is subtle and gradual, which is precisely why it works politically. Nobody votes against it because nobody announces it. Here's the sequence. The Fed cuts rates. Inflation builds. Long-term bond investors push yields up. Banks, freed from the SLR, absorb that supply and keep rates from spiraling. Inflation runs modestly above the government's borrowing rate. The debt-to-GDP ratio slowly shrinks over decades. You pay through purchasing power erosion. Every dollar saved buys a little less. Every fixed income investment delivers a real return below inflation. Quietly, year after year, the people who understood this after World War II protected themselves by holding assets that rise with inflation: real estate, commodities, and equities in businesses with genuine pricing power. Cash and bonds did not keep pace. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it follows the same math. The new Fed chair isn't arriving to protect your savings. He's been handed an impossible equation and found a solution that works for the government, not for you. It worked before. It will probably work again for the government. The question isn't whether the plan succeeds. It's what you're holding while it plays out. Cash and fixed income were the losers last time. Real assets were the winners. The playbook is the same, and it's already in motion. If this helps you understand what's happening behind the headlines, a like or subscribe helps more people find it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Educational content only, not personal financial advice.